She will join us. She will join us once we start because she knew we were starting exactly at 10:30. So I think let's go ahead and start if that's okay with you.
Thank you, Grace. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Batana. I'm the programs manager from WOW. Sorry, I realized I had turned off my video.
Okay.
All right, so welcome from all over Zimbabwe who is joining us for this very insightful discussion. My name is Batanai Gwangwa and I'm the programs manager from WOW. So for this discussion, we are going to be moderated by Grace Chirenje, who is here already. So I'll just turn on Grace. Welcome everyone from Zimbabwe and from around the globe. Participants or panelists are coming from outside Zimbabwe and also in Zimbabwe and around Zimbabwe. I hope we can all have a good time, enjoy the discussion. Thank you all. Grace, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Bati, and welcome to everyone. It's such a delight to have you to join on a wonderful conversation. And our topic for discussion today is the Zimbabwean crisis. Women as solution holders, what needs done? And I think for so long we have had many conversations happening, but very few have focused exclusively on what women think and including the women's voices. And to me, this topic, I got the most amazing panelists, and I'd like to invite them now to introduce themselves, starting with Namatai. Namatai, can you hear me? Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Thank you so much, Grace. All right, so my name is Namatai Kokeza, and I work with an institution called We Lead, which is a youth leadership development and advocacy institution. And we have a major focus on the rights of young women and also ensuring that young women also assume leadership roles.
Thank you, Namatai, and welcome to this conversation. Next, I would like to invite Mantate to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Grace. Hi, everybody. My name is Mandata Mnoja. I work at Magamba Network as project lead for a program called Arts for Change.
Thank you, Mantate, and welcome. Namganso, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for extending this invitation to me. I'm excited to be here in this space to learn and also to share ideas with you. I'm a South African by birth, and I advocate for human rights, justice, and freedom.
Thank you very much, Namgamso. Rubizai, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm Rumzai Kandosukanundu, gender equality and women's rights advocate or practitioner.
Right, and thank you so much, Rumzai, for introducing yourself and welcome to the conversation. Our final panelist to introduce herself will be Honorable Priscilla. Would you like to go next, please?
I'm Priscilla Mesaira Bwimshonga. Hi, guys. I'm a feminist.
Welcome, Honorable Priscilla. So I'm so excited to have all of you on the panel today, and I want to maintain the same order and just invite you, the panelists, to unpack the topic, the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done. But tonight, would you please just mute mics? If you're not speaking, kindly mute your mic because we're getting a lot of feedback. Namatai, I would like to invite you to go first in terms of unpacking the topic, the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done. Namatai, can you hear me?
Hello, now I can hear you. Hello?
Okay. I was saying I'd like you to go in unpacking the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done. Would you 5 minutes now?
Absolutely great. All right, so I think maybe I'll just start by saying that we need to be cognizant of the fact that whatever solutions are going to be brought in this country with regards to the Zimbabwean crisis, women, and in particular young women, are going to have to be central. And we say this in the context that women constitute the majority of the population, and particularly young women. So I think that maybe the first thing that needs to be stated and that needs to be clearly articulated is the crisis itself. What are we taming, the Zimbabwean crisis? What's the Zimbabwean crisis? And in this context, we appreciate that it's an amalgamation of different facets, from the economic, the social, the political, and all of these things are interacting in such a way that they're going to affect men and women differently. They're going to affect older women and younger women differently. And that's in the context of the crisis. So maybe we start off with the political crisis, in the context that human rights violations are something that are very imminent, in the context that there's no freedom of speech, in the context that we've seen young women, human rights defenders, young political activists who are women, being brutalized, sometimes even, sexually. So we experience a certain kind of violence that is unique and specific to us because we are women. Then we look at it from the perspective of the social aspect, we look at it from the perspective of the economic aspect. The lockdown, the COVID-19 lockdown, has intensified a crisis that had already been there. And we'll see that the number of, the number of abuses, domestic violence, and things like that has actually escalated. So we think about this from the context that how is it affecting women? We appreciate that men and women are different, and we appreciate that women will uniquely experience, this crisis differently from whatever part it's coming from. So it's quite instrumental for us to then say, and second of all, we are not in a position where we are going to have solutions that are going to be inclusive for everyone, solutions that are going to, in all of these issues, also be cognizant and sensitive to women and their specific needs if we are not being represented by women in decision making and in positions of influence. So I would actually say that the crisis that we experience in our country is because we have a patriarchal regime, we have a patriarchal government, and this patriarchy escalates itself to business, it escalates itself to economics, it escalates itself to all other facets of life. And one of the key things that we must work on for us to be in a position where we, assist women, or maybe assist is not the appropriate word, but where we create opportunity for women to actually be in a position where they're strategically positioned to, solve the crisis that exists, is to feminize our system, to feminize our government, feminize our political parties, feminize our businesses, so that we ensure that women are represented. And one of the key things that is essential in making sure that that happens is being able to implement the Constitution, which clearly stipulates aspects to be gender parity. So I think for now, I'll settle at that.
Thank you so much, Namatai. And I really like what you said in terms of the feminization of the Zimbabwean crisis, because it brings about the different narratives that both men and everyone, men and women are facing, but especially young women. So thank you for that. Mantate, would you like to go for your 5 minutes now and unpack the topic, the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done?
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you, Namatai, as well, for just opening for us. I wanted to just focus on 3 key areas that I feel are of concern to me, especially as a young woman. Because I feel like sometimes when you talk about the crisis affecting women, we tend to forget that there's that demographic of young women that really needs to be discussed. So the first thing that I wanted to have a conversation about is the issue of the lockdown itself, the fact that a lot of young women were forced to stay at home, some of them staying at home with people that have been for a long time perpetrators of abuse. So you discover that a lot of them were not safe at home. And just recently, I think 3 days back, we had a headline in one of our newspapers that was the way it was written, it was something like shockers 4 grade 7 schoolgirls fall pregnant during lockdown. And the conversation that has been there on Twitter and other social media platforms has been a question of when did we shift from calling it rape to a situation where we just assume or state something that talks of us being shocked that girls were pregnant, but we move away from the idea that this is actually reflective of abuse and sexual violation, because these are grade 7 kids, these are underage kids, so they did not consent to this. So I think that's the biggest problem I've had as well, issues of safety for our girls, but also within that framework of staying at home as well. If you're looking at some of those cases of abuse, you discover that if a child is abused by a father or a brother, because now they're spending more time with the family would rather protect they call it the dignity of the father, but I don't understand why we speak of the dignity of a man when he's abused and indignified a woman. So that's one of the problems that I feel we really have as a crisis in the country. But also looking at a situation where, if you look at places like Bulawayo, where there's a huge water crisis, and I've been seeing a lot of tweets and videos around the fact that people are going as early as 4 a.m. or even earlier just to hold queues so that they get water in bowls, or at least prepare for when the council water comes for delivery and stuff like that. So you discover that it becomes very unsafe for young women, because if I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. and have to queue for water, it means that at the level of security, I'm not safe as a young woman. So there's a higher risk of sexual abuse of young women due to this water crisis. But also looking at this water crisis, the other thing that we have as a challenge in Zim is the issue of access to sanitary ware for girls. I think this has been really accelerated around this COVID-19 period, because I remember when the national budget was approved, we were told that there was a budget allocation for young girls in schools to actually get sanitary ware. But because schools have been closed and no one has been holding the government accountable to say who actually got the sanitary pads, because the kids are they're actually at home and not at school. So that's another question that needs to be answered. But beyond that as well, there is the issue of the transport crisis in Zimbabwe right now, where you're realizing that a lot of the people are having to queue for Zuko buses. And you discover that some of those queues actually stretch to the evening, and you find that some of those girls have to take even longer to get home. And it comes back to the issue of the security after dark, because I think we've seen reports of how crime has generally increased, there are more robberies around this time. So you discover that our girls are not safe. But more than just the problems that we're looking at, I think the question that we're really trying to answer today is what must be done. And my first point of call really is with the law enforcement itself, because if you look at the crisis I mentioned earlier about grade 7 girls that have fallen pregnant, one of the things that was noted is that the police is not actually, they don't seem proactive around the issue. And when you discover, the report is talking about a conversation with the district education officer, one of the things it mentions is that we will wait for schools to open and then we'll see who is absent and then take up the issue. And that worries me a lot, because while you're waiting for schools to open, and you can look at the number of girls that are not showing up at school, so that you can determine or decide that, okay, these are potentially the girls that have been abused or the girls that have fallen pregnant. I think during that time, while you're waiting, there's a girl that needs support, there's a girl that needs to report this, because as I said earlier, it's sexual abuse. So we really need the law itself and the Ministry of Education to be more active. But also beyond that, there's the issue of reporting in Zimbabwe, where a lot of our girls are struggling to report abuse because the police doesn't take them seriously, or in some instances you find that someone goes to the police to report abuse, and these police officers will actually ask these kids or these young girls to sleep with them in order to accelerate these cases. So that's another big problem. And also coming back to the media as well, to say the way that we report issues, especially issues of abuse of young women, also has a lot with the way that people receive it. Because if you look at a situation where someone reports shock as 4 grade 7 girls fall pregnant during lockdown, instead of actually saying rape of young girls or primary school girls, you discover that focus moves away from perpetrators of sexual abuse into actually blaming the victims for apparently falling pregnant. And there's that issue as well for civil society and everyone else to actually hold government accountable. For instance, in issues of access to sanitary, where I mentioned that there was a budget allocation for sanitary pads, but to this day, we're not told who actually got this, because the promise had been that it's going to schoolgirls, but no one has been at school since March. So the question really is, where did this money go? And then also the last thing that I think must be done is the increase in the number of safe houses. I mentioned earlier that some of these girls are forced to stay at home with perpetrators of violence or sexual abuse. So discover that there is no place for them to run to. Civil society organizations can be overwhelmed as well. So there is need for the state to make provision for the safe houses where young girls can actually go there if they're abused. So I think that's basically my state of the nation right now and some of the ideas for how we can play around addressing these issues.
Thank you, Mantate. That was a very profound unpacking of the topic today. And let me just give Nangamso an opportunity to unpack the topic for us before I'll come back to the panelists. Nangamso, please.
I definitely support Namatai and Mantate's call for women, and particularly young women, to come to the front and to be able to not only brainstorm and give an account of what the issues are, but to also be included in how do we formulate and how do we design the necessary solutions for all of us to be able to live in a safe environment. And that is a safe environment even during the lockdown. I do also express concern that I have heard that there has been a challenge when it comes to access to water and basic human primary services in Zimbabwe. So that is something that definitely would call upon a united force to come up with ideas and to brainstorm solutions as to how do we hold those that are accountable for delivering those primary basic human services, and how do we ensure that the institutions that are responsible for those services to be delivered are actually actioning out their mandate. One of the things that I would like to express interest in also looking at how we can work together to achieve is the inclusion and the support of women who wish to add value to not only legislation, but also developmental theories of change that are necessary in Zimbabwe's case. Also, I would extend that further to say, perhaps touching on including women and supporting women with the appetite to lead efficiently and effectively, most particularly in the legislation environment. And lastly, I would like to also contribute towards ideas of how do we coordinate a network, not only women, but all stakeholders who are advocates for human rights, justice, and freedom.
Thank you so much, Nangamso, for that unpacking. Rumbidzai, would you like to take your 5 minutes and unpack the topic, the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done? Rumbidzai, can you hear me? Rumbi, you're up next, if you can hear me. Okay. Priscilla, would you like to go next? It looks like Rumbidzai's mic is unmuted, but I cannot hear her. Priscilla, would you like to go next?
Yes.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I think I would like to start by just congratulating WALP for putting this together. For some of us who have been on this road before, it is a welcome change to what has been going on in Zimbabwe. And you probably know that some of us have refused to comment on anything that is happening in Zimbabwe, precisely because we felt that the narrative was very male. And I'm quite excited that we are beginning to talk about how we bring in a feminist narrative to what is going on. So as I speak to the unpacking, I think language is important. I'm not sure that the languages we have taken on in even beginning to talk about this process is a female language. And I'll justify it. Females never really talk around crisis, because if we spoke about crisis, nothing would ever happen. I mean, there's always some problem from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. That's your women's life. And I think the way we have dealt with it is because we have understood problems as challenges. Because the moment you look at a crisis, it disempowers you. The moment you define something as a crisis, it disempowers you. You start at a level in which this is so big, it can't be dealt with. So I would say, as I unpick what is happening in Zimbabwe, I would say perhaps the lingo has to change. So for Zimbabwe, we are looking at what are the challenges from a feminist perspective. We've been there before. And when I say we've been there before, if you look at the role of women during the challenges, the post-colonial challenges, the role of women as we crafted the constitution, which we are very proud of, was on the basis of what are the challenges and how do we ensure that we deal with those challenges from both an institutional point of view and from a legislative point of view. And there were structures that women built to be able to come to the point where we agreed on what the challenge was. So as we have this discussion, I see it as the beginning of a process. Because I remember that when we, prior to going into the inclusive government, we actually had a closed door process with a few women at that particular point in time, where we came up with a white paper. But we spent a bit more time to say, but what exactly is our challenge? Some of these challenges that we are taking on because they have been fed into us so many times, and we have taken them as our challenges. Is there a different way of beginning to define those challenges? And just listening to colleagues that have spoken before, I can begin to see the different trends that we could take on. And like Namatai said, both from a political, economic, and social. And I'm sure if we were to sit down as women, we may actually find that our narrative is completely different from the narrative that is given to the world. And understandably, let's also understand that Zimbabwe has been internationalized. And with internationalization comes a particular narrative. The question is, that narrative, what is it based on? What are the ideological issues that are foundational to the narrative that we have taken on as a narrative for Zimbabwe? Is there no time, particularly if you are talking as feminists, of beginning to critique that narrative? Not only from a male-female perspective, but from an ideological perspective. Because I think there are underlying ideological perspectives that are associated with the challenges that Zimbabwe has. Very simply put, without taking most of your time, I actually believe as feminists, we have always been leftist to some extent. Is the globalization that is happening where capital and capitalism has taken over the definition of what is socially acceptable, what is economically acceptable, what is politically acceptable. Has it impacted on what is currently happening in Zimbabwe? And I find it a bit sad when we deal with the issues and the challenges of Zimbabwe purely from what is happening in Zim and not necessarily from global forces and the ideological issues that we are beginning to see that not only impact on Zimbabwe, but on Africa in general. So that is a whole lot of things that I've put there, but I'm hoping that we can actually find some indaba, closed indaba, a safe space in which we can interrogate some of these things more detailed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. And yes, the language will change as of now, right now. So the Zimbabwean situation, women as solution holders, what needs to be done? I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Rumbi?
Hi, Grace.
You're
Can you
up
hear
next.
me?
Oh, fantastic. Yes, I can hear you, my sister. Welcome. Your
Okay.
5 minutes to unpack and maybe also speak a little bit about the elections and by-elections and that situation, being an expert around those issues.
Okay, Grace, but let's take one thing at a time, because if we now start bringing in the dynamics of elections, that's also another indaba, separate indaba that we would need. I just want to build on what everyone else has said, and in relation to what Priscilla was saying about the narrative, I really think that we need to have a very deep understanding of what we are dealing with, because that deep understanding will help us, as Priscilla rightly says, and Matai have mentioned, and all the other colleagues as well, to pinpoint what are the issues. And indeed, I think if we to talk about a crisis, we've always been a country in a crisis mode for years. So now we might just call them issues and challenges, perennial issues and challenges that we need to address. And for me, it might, I just want to give it a very broad outlook that, you know, I think all the issues and challenges that are really entrenched and deep-seated within Zimbabwe and what we are going through right now and what we've gone through over the years, it's so much entrenched in the socio-cultural systems and processes of the country, to an extent where a lot of what I see happening is that as women, we act so much as the custodians of culture and the doers of so-called culture without unpacking its impact on us individually as women and as women as a group. And in that regard, we have a very patriarchal system, and patriarchy, it's all about male privilege. And this is what it gives the basis, at least from my perspective, the basis of the problems for Zimbabwe, where there's a lot of patriarchal entitlement and privilege, such that everybody else, you know, there's a ranking. And even as women, we are not a homogeneous group. And this is why even our narrative is weakened, because we are not looking at the issues of what is this system doing in terms of exercising power over us, rather than empowering us and us empowering ourselves so that it can be power sharing and exercising power with us. I see a lot of the social cultural issues that come in many ways, whether it's even in the education, in as much as we might claim that women in Zimbabwe and the men in Zimbabwe are highly educated in terms of the academic, the papers, but it does not bring wisdom and understanding of what is happening and what needs to be changed. So what we have is the book knowledge, but we don't have the wisdom for transformative change and development. If at all, it's like we are going 100 steps backwards. If you look at Zimbabwe right now, it's almost like, I don't know, it's something that we never imagined would find ourselves in such a country, in such a context. And therefore, I think the monster called patriarchy and how it has entrenched itself, such that even as women, we don't see the dysfunction from an individual women's perspective and as broadly as women as a group. Take violence against women, whether it emanates in the private or so-called domestic sphere, and how it manifests itself at a national level, and how we are able to rationalize and explain it to a certain extent. It's mind-boggling And I'm always thinking, what is it that we need to do to uproot this social cultural context, which then has political, in fact, impacts on the political, economic, everything else. But we have allowed a certain way of life where it's the domination, it's all about domination and male domination, and a few or thereabouts, a group of women that can be identified as part of the male dominated network, and everybody else has to be subjected and be oppressed and be silenced. So I don't think I have like pinpointed like one quick fix solution, but I think we really need to unpack and say, what system are we dealing with and where are the points for breakthroughs? Because it's so entrenched and it affects everything.
All right. Thank you so much, Rumbi. Thank you very much. I like your focus on the system and what needs to be done in terms of working with that and unpacking it. I want to come to you, Namatai, and I know that you're very passionate about the constitutional amendments. And I want to hear from you, what do you think needs to be done to facilitate for a broader constitutional amendment number 2 consultations and making sure that young women's voices are included when we look at issues to do with that?
For the question, Grace. We are from a place of just acknowledging that at the point where we are at, I'm sure Honorable Ms. Rabu can affirm this. We are past the stage where they can be much in the way of consultation with regards to the due legal processes around how constitutions are amended. So we are past the stage, but maybe we can look at this from a reflective perspective, because I, for one, am extremely disgruntled and unhappy about how the process was done. So I'm very excited that Honorable Priscilla is here. Yeah, maybe she can also share the sentiments with her colleagues. I mean, the fact that these consultations were held during the COVID-19 lockdown and pandemic is in itself an exclusionary tactic. You know, to leave a lot of the important voices, particularly the voice of the majority, who are the young women, out. We can be cognizant of some of the issues that Mantante raised, that already because it was the COVID-19 lockdown, you could appreciate that it was difficult to move around. It posed so many security issues for women to be moving around to access some of those locations. And basically, you know, their views and opinions were not captured. And yet most of the decisions that are being made are going to come back to affect them. We also look at it from the perspective of the women's quota, the extension of which, you know, just implement the constitution. We really don't need quota systems. This is the position that was being reiterated even during the public hearings, as the majority of the people who attended were saying no to the constitutional amendments. But we see the attitude now with how the process has just proceeded without the voices of the many, which have been discredited on account of that. According to the Minister of Justice, you say that the people who attended the hearing were coach responsible to say no. So I think my submission to say that we have to feminize everything. We have to feminize our constitution. We have to feminize our systems. We have to feminize all of these things, because as the
yeah, so I think my comment first of all